Awesome intro, Addy.
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
thank you, Peter. This is the Paddy Wagon on the Reality OS and Rockfin Addy Ads. We got a special guest, Johnny Vedmore, investigative journalist, bona fide, and he is somebody whose work is well respected by both myself and Peter. And he's also featured on Peter's new website, The Duke Report. So we have a lot to talk about this evening. Klaus Schwab, maybe some Jeffrey Epstein, maybe some Maxwell, and a whole lot of other stuff. So thanks for coming on the show, Mr. Vedmore, and good evening to both of you guys.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for having me on. It's a really good experience to be actually able to get on a load of podcasts and stuff and meet loads of new people. And like it's been a hard old journey. I started off in this journey like everybody else, struggling to understand what people wanted to know or needed to know, and getting to a point that once I did understand and I did understand how to find it and put it into an article form, then the whole industry became closed off. Like there was no way up. It reminded me very much of my experience within music, where everybody's trying, and in the BBC, in the Britain especially, everybody's trying to beg the BBC for a little bit of the pie. Oh, please, look, I'll make these demos and make these albums, and please, please, please. But they control the whole market. You don't get any hope. You never get anybody up. I've seen the most amazing musical artists around in South Wales who just get passed over and over again because, well, they don't fit the theme that the BBC are trying to.
Because they didn't come out of the Tavistock Institute.
Yeah, with the BBC, yes. With the other, I mean, there was a guy who was one of the top heads of a Capital Radio when I was working in hotels about like 10 years ago, and I was telling him, listen, I'm in the music. I play regularly in clubs and stuff. The music scene's completely dead, and you're in like Capital Radio. It's a really like big station. How can people like us get our music on there? And he said, you just can't. Yeah, there's no way you get any of this on there because we don't want it. We're not interested. We're interested in selling for adverts. Then a rent boy came in the hotel who had just had a conversation outside, who had told me he had HIV and looked really, really bad, poor off. And they went up to the hotel room together. And that was like very emblematic of the whole music industry as I saw it. This like it's corrupt. And this is the same thing I experienced within going into independent journalism, because I did have like some very early success against the grain of most independent journalists very early on, and then everything was really hard. And when I reached my point when I was really producing some really good work that really I understood this system that I was looking at and I was inspecting a lot more, and I started to see the one lady who shall not be named, NJ, we can call her Junkerman. She was an Epstein associate. When I did my research on her, I knew that was the moment where things were about to change over for me. That I was about to go from having a hard time getting just for the basics. For you're a new journalist, you're just writing. I don't have any education. I don't have anything like that. So I'm learning to form articles and where I can get them out, finding a platform. Anyway, I went from the point where I felt confident in that. I had a little platform that I could use. They were a new platform, so they were allowing me to produce stories that were a little bit against the
And
grain.
which platform was that?
That was vocal.media, which is just you get paid pittance for the amount of reads you get,
Mm-hmm.
really. And it was before it got floated on. I think it got floated on the stocks and shares. They sold it out, and of course, then come up all of the warnings, and then they took down the first Youngman article, claiming that it was to do with the picture and it was. I mean, the whole thing. I was receiving loads of emails from people who were like working, well, a fair few emails from people who were working on microtasking websites who were literally paid to go through my name and her name on Google and look for all of the articles where not only she's mentioned, but I mentioned too, and wipe us off the internet. Just I had to fight to be put back on to any like sort of like
Yeah, yeah,
visible.
yeah. You have to wonder why Amazon created Mechanical Turk, right?
Well,
Was
I
to
did
kind of
something around this time to combat that. I released all my music officially through platforms that were mainstream, which would mean they wouldn't be able to hide my name from the top in like this normal search engines. But now I come up as musical artist first, and I'm being contacted at the moment by people like the BBC about stuff, and they haven't worked out that I'm a journalist because they censor themselves and the information at the same time. They
so I
wouldn't
have
actually, if they knew, they wouldn't want to work with me.
I have a question. So were you a performer also? You're a performing musician? Because the reason that I'm asking the question,
Yeah. I was.
yeah, go on.
I've been I started playing when I was really young, and by the time I was like, I went through a load of health problems. I had Graves' disease, had to have radioactive treatment, had to have like a major surgery on my throat and stuff. And then by the time I was like 30, 31, I'd written so many songs I was finally able to perform. And so I just went out everywhere and tried to get out everywhere, recorded all of the time. And so it got to the point though where it gets depressing when you're playing to rooms that will never fill up. They
Right.
won't fill up. However much advertising or marketing you do, you're not a big act anymore because there's only the big acts or nothing at all.
The reason that I'm asking the question is because, and I'm sorry about the delay. Johnny's in Wales and I'm in the Pacific Palisades, so we'll figure this out. We'll bugger on. But the reason I'm asking the question is because I started out weirdly enough. I was a computer science major in college, and I dropped out of college to be a fashion photographer, and I did that for almost 20 years. And as I kind of fell into journalism in the like around 2014. I started trying to kind of do a reconciliation of what it is that kind of attracted me to that. And what I realized was that all of the technology that I had been using, whether or not it was a camera and models and lighting in order to get people to buy clothes, or whether or not it was designing websites in order to get people to click on things, it was all about getting people to do something, right? And one of the things that I noticed, because I've got a lot of friends who are musicians, is that, if you're on stage and you're playing your song, you've got your instrument, you're doing your thing, you see the effect that your craft has on the audience, and you start to have this perception that human beings are affected by the stuff that you're doing, whether or not it's a picture that you take or it's a song that you play. Like, they can be affected by this stuff. And then as you start to try to kind of uncover the truth and try to figure out what's really going on in the world, you start to notice that, hey, musicians and photographers aren't the only people who are doing this. There's a bunch of people who call themselves journalists who are using words and pictures in order to kind of steer conversations into another direction. And so this is kind of a lead up to a question. It might be softball, I don't know. But do you think that because you have this background as a musician that you have more of an understanding about how people can be manipulated?
Yes, and I've been thinking about this a lot very much recently, because what I've discovered, and this is a trick for anybody who's a budding journalist, something that you take, if you profile something, whether it be, I once profiled sex offenders so I could understand sex offenders during like a data diving series where I was looking for pedophiles online and trying to expose them. I had to understand which different types they were. And once you work out that you can profile them into 3 very distinct categories, then you discover that there's a whole bunch of these type of guys who are all separate from these type of guys and all separate. You understand the structure. Now in life, in everything, whatever you're investigating, you can take then that structure and implement it over to something else. And I took loads of parts of music with me, not only the actual understanding that I could actually affect someone and how they thought. I think you this is like intertwined with music so much, because as you're creating music, as you're sitting there writing music, you're going through an emotional experience that you want to bring out in that song. Because honestly, if you're a proper musician who cares about music, you're not doing something because because you want it to sound good for somebody else. You want to do it because you're trying to express something out through a musical form, and you become emotionally attached to that, and you go through a journey with a song. A song develops and creates, and in the same way I used that to understand the structure of how to describe articles to people, how to give people understandings. The layers of articles is like the layers of instruments. You know, if I want someone to understand something as complex as I've written about, like the Welcome Trust, Welcome Fire, something like the modern article on Schwab, when it's so super complex and you'll be all over the place, I kind of reduce it into saying, okay, these people who are involved are like the different instruments. So define the instrument to the people and layer it. So if you notice, I've done a kind of very simple profile method in the last piece. I showed the 3 mentors of Schwab, and then able to coalesce it into a middle 8, into a solo, and then into an outro. And so really, everything that you do in life has this kind of structure attached that you can take off. So all my experience, what led me here, isn't only like music. See the music industry be destroyed in front of me. See how they did it. They did it with policies, social policies. They put up flats, and they sold out all of the buildings in the city stations, and all those corporations put accommodation up there, and all of that accommodation meant you can no longer make sound after a certain amount of time, and when you did make sound, it had to be of a low decibel. Every nightclub became a heat house, a hot house, for where you could barely stand up because it was so hot, because there's so much soundproofing in there. They become smaller and smaller clubs because there'd be less of them. And there'd be more soundproofing as well. All of the big clubs disappeared. You know, you see the effects these people's policies have on your everyday culture and how they bash away at your culture. So I learned. I learned not only from that, but I learned also from 20 years experience of working in hotels, in 5-star hotels, where I saw how celebrities and famous people act behind closed doors. I was 19 when I first went to work in a Hilton, in a 5-star Hilton, and I saw some of the craziest. I was a night porter. They put me on nights 5 weeks a week, and so they were like, so 5-star hotel, really busy time, and it was crazy. I got doped with PCP at one point, so a load of people could steal cars, and they were all hanging out with a celebrity who's a guy who groomed lots of people, and that will come out very soon. And there's lots of experience then I took from understanding within hotels about the structural the structure of organizations, because when you start in opening hotels, which the first hotel I ever worked in was an opening hotel, I worked in a couple of opening hotels, you sit down, all the staff at the beginning, and you say, let's write up the standard operating procedures together. And everybody sits down and they write their own rules and they write their own cage. And trust me, people, when they don't realize they're writing their own cage and it seems distant from them, it seems about making sure the business runs right.
Making sure that people are safe.
They will write their own policies in detail. They will write their own social policies that will cage them and will be even worse. And this is why they allow this. This is why they encourage this in opening hotels and stuff, because it will be even worse than anything. They would never be able to implement all of these rules unless it was people's ideas. So you find out you're in a room full of people who are just starting in a hotel, and they'll just turn around and say, okay, how do we stop people from faking being ill from work? And suddenly all of these people are given all different reasons that will then be used for people who are actually ill to stop them from not being able to go to work or for having a day off. And they write these cages, and you get these at the end of like a 2-week process, you end up with these folders and folders and folders and folders. It's all drilled into you what you do, and you enter into this mechanical state where suddenly, you know, you could be convinced to do loads of different things. My first ever interview with a Hilton hotel, the first question at the interview when I sat down was, what do you do if a guest asks for a prostitute? And my response was, send him to a red light district, get him a taxi. And they said no. And he ran, the guy, Brian Byrne, he did have a bit of a drinking problem. He ran through the entire process of how I arrange for a prostitute, bring them up to coordinate between the guest, prostitute, talk, make sure the money is exchanged, come back down, wait the time, go back up, make sure if they need more time, make sure if there's more exchange of money needed, that you escort the lady to a cash point or the like, so she's safe. Go back up, put them back for wait again, come back down, find a taxi, entertain the lady in the patisserie with a tea or coffee while you're waiting, etc.
And when you got hit with that, like, how did that impact you? Because it seems like maybe your frame changed, right? Your frame on what was real changed. Yeah.
I was 18 years old. I had just gone through like loads of family stuff where there was a like really severe divorce going on between my mum and my dad. It had been years and years of turmoil and stuff like this. And suddenly I walked into big business, and I walked into this massive, and this is brilliant. I'm going to try and get a job in place, and it'll look really swanky, and they all dress us up like Captain Scarlet with special uniforms and stuff. And I really, when he hit me with the first question, I was just like, I'm obviously not going to get this job. Obviously, I've said the wrong thing, but I then had said the right thing, because I didn't say anything while he talked me through it, and I just nodded my head. And so that meant for him that I'm the right guy for the job, and I got the job. And then I realized, oh, right, okay, nothing is quite as it seems, of course. But then I went into a world where it was just literally loads of there was opening stadium called the Millennium Stadium that was opening at the Millennium. This was 1999, the end of 1999. Prince Charles came down to open the hotel itself. It was a big deal. It was the first 5-star hotel in the area. There was concerts lined up. Wembley was closing in England, so Wales suddenly had this big Millennium Stadium, and all of the concerts would be there. And there was a Millennium concert, and then there was a World Cup rugby at the end of 1999 with all the nations. It was turmoil. It was amazing. It was drugs, sex, rock and roll. It's what my granddad told me to watch out for when I went to work in hotels. He said, I used to work in hotels, and you want to watch out for, it's all that sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So you be careful of that. So that's what he told me when I got to work in the Hilton. Boom, went into the Hilton. First question was, yeah, okay, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And it was all around the place. You know, everybody was doing crazy things. We were high all of the time. It took about 6 months for me to sort myself out and stop being a child and being like completely high in work all of the time and accepting things off random guests, because when you're in a place where everybody's partying, guests will pass you things, offer you into the room. I used to finish work and go up to guests' room and just get high with them and have a great old time, you know. And it was like you work in something where you're supposed to be a servant or etc., but it's like you're supposed to be this everything servant, and you become having this weird relationship with people where they open up to you about every single thing. And so I went through years of working, like I say, 20 years until 2020, the end of 2020. I was working full time on a one-man hotel with 52 rooms, serving all the place up while writing articles on the front desk nearly the entire time.
That's wild. Really so you think the skills of being able to manage all of those different personality types informed your ability to be a journalist? I assume that you had lots of different personalities that you had to deal with, and you had to make those people happy. Did you? And how did you transition from? So you were working at a hotel, right? You were a journalist working at a hotel. And
yeah, in a travel lodge.
And are you still working at Travel Lodge? You're not still working at Travel Lodge.
I was gonna get fired, to be perfectly honest, because I had let a guy who was in stage 4 cancer and his wife stay in a room for way too long on staff rate. I had pretended that he was a member of my family. The guy, I felt so he was dying. So it came from somewhere as well where he was from. had bought some land and it was basically poisoned by chemicals, and he couldn't get any justice. Then his son stole all of his money in the last minute and stuff, and they were desperate. And so we had gone through all of that process, and I was about to get done, and then COVID hit in, and so that gave me a little bit of reprieve. And then I was just like, well, I can't. I moved out to Chile then. I was like, oh, I better get out now because they're going to find me anyway. Once
right. Well, you had the timing down correctly, because I'm still in California, and I just kind of feel like it's too late for me to get out. I've
come back again now.
I've got to bug in instead of bug out. So anyway, okay. So I found you, I think, through through Whitney Webb, through Unlimited Hangout, and Addy and I both kind of tripped into this citizen journalism world. I'm not a journalist. I'm more of an aggregator. I'm a media analyst, and so, I run into people all the time and say, I started off with a camera. I met Andrew Breitbart in 2010, and he said politics is downstream from culture, and I started noticing that people who are saying the things that come to Florida, Peter. We'll talk about that later. People who were saying things that resonated with me were being portrayed in a really negative way in the media. And I thought, well, I know how to use a camera, so I can take pictures of people that are saying the things that I more or less agree with, and make them look good. At least I can make them look good, right? Mm-hmm. And that blew off the top of a few people's heads, to the point where the New York Times wrote a profile on me and called me the Andy Leibovitz of the alt-right. The only thing that I was doing was taking pictures of people that were saying things that other people were disagreeing with, and they weren't being portrayed correctly. So that kind of I never realized when I was a fashion photographer what a great networking tool the camera was. And that kind of led me down this journey where, I'm with Alex Jones on January 6th in Washington, D.C., taking pictures. And all along the way, the curtains fall, right? The idea that, and what's interesting is I'm old. I'm 65 years old, and for me to start to realize, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, the Constitution isn't really a thing. The government isn't really a thing. There's a group of people who run the world that are not the people that are on television. All of those things. You're younger than I am, and so you don't have as much, remorse for how long you've been asleep. But I'm glad that I'm awake now, and I'm a giant cynic, and I realize now that my latest breakthrough is just really understanding what the dialectic is, and understanding how there's always two solutions presented to the public on how to solve problems, and those two solutions are usually not very different from one another, and they are usually both going in the direction of the New World Order. So give me another answer besides the two you're offering. I think we lost Addy there for a second.
Yeah, he's there.
So anyway, and that kind of all leads us to Klaus Schwab. And along my journey, I ran into this guy about 5 years ago named George Webb, like I said. And George Webb was walking around the Capitol with his iPhone live streaming and talking about bioweapon labs, and nuclear intrigues and things like that. And I was noticing when I was reading your piece on Schwab, the intrigues on what was going on in South Africa with the nuclear power program in South Africa, because I think again, I'm not the expert on all the details. George, and there's another guy that we follow, Mark Kulak, who has a channel called Housatonic ITS, talks about Mark Rich. And Mark Rich was down in South Africa, I believe, doing uranium deals. And so I wonder whether or not, and he was famously pardoned by Bill Clinton. And so I wonder whether or not there's an overlap between the stuff that you had found out in South Africa and Mark Rich. And then another third kind of weird thing is that I think that Robert Swan Mueller II and George might have corrected me. Robert Swan Mueller III was the special prosecutor for the Russia investigation of Trump. Well, it turns out that his father was the director of a company that made special metals for nuclear power programs. So there's a nuclear component there. So when I was reading your article, I was thinking the three of you guys should touch base at some point and check your notes out, because it seems like there's some kind of, and then probably Maxwell is in there someplace too, right?
always lurking in the corridors is Ghislaine Maxwell, looking for her little gallerinas. She is a strange one. Probably Robert Maxwell, of course. The fact is that there's a lot in South Africa to unpack that you could go back 200 years on, because South Africa,
the Round Table all was born there, right?
Yeah. Well, but before the Round Table was being born, in the kind of way South Africa was, it was really a badlands. It was a complete and there's some stories. I'm doing research on a certain person in the past, and I cannot tell you any of this research because it's for a book. It's a very famous person of the past, and I've had to go through the Transvaal, the history of the Transvaal, so the previous entity that was South Africa before it was South Africa, and all of the way, and it really is more the Wild West than the Wild West is. The stories there are crazy, and a lot of the people who didn't who weren't very good at being police officers or other things in places that were too corrupt for even places like London in the 1800s would be sent down to South Africa. They were basically kicked out to one of the other places to go work, and it ended up being I think a place like my high school, which had a special rule that anybody who got expelled from any other school got to come to our high school, and no one got expelled from our high school. So it meant we had just the worst people all in the high school, and that was a real trip. But that's what South Africa became for a long time, and that attitude obviously came out culturally over the time. We know the history of South Africa, and during the late 60s, during this period, I mean, this is when Schwab leaves Harvard, and he's approached by Peter Schmidheiny, and Peter Schmidheiny was the son of Jacob Schmidheiny, and Jacob Schmidheiny was like a Swiss colonel who was well into the nuclear program and with Escher Weiss, or the atomic program, sorry, with Escher Weiss from the late 30s through the early 40s, and onwards, of course, because Escher Weiss at the time that Schwab is asked by Peter Schmidheiny to come and help with the merger of Escher Weiss and Schulze and another company called Brown Boveri into what would be Schulze AG, and Brown Boveri would be another company that they would coordinate what they produce and stuff with each other so that they could both make profits and not compete with each other anymore. That was part of the merger that Schwab managed to make happen. And that company, Schulze AG, around that exact time would be creating nuclear parts, Escher, under the name Escher Weiss still, for South Africa, and then under Schulze Escher Weiss, and then under Schulze AG for the South African nuclear bomb program, which started out to be a program that used heavy water, which was the same that the German atomic bomb program had used, and needs massive turbines, and Escher Weiss was a place where you get massive turbines. And of course, Klaus Schwab's father was a manager of what had been previously the model Nazi company during the Nazi era, of Escher Weiss in Ravensburg. There's two Escher Weiss factories. There's one in Switzerland and one in Ravensburg. The atomic bomb and nuclear stuff seems to have all gone through the German one. The Swiss one, you don't know really what goes through there. I'm sure there's even worse.
Yeah, it's funny because the nuclear, there was for a while, George was talking about how it seemed like George and Mark were both talking about how it seemed like whenever you found somebody, they always their background directly led to some kind of nuclear power program. And when I was reading your thing about Klaus Schwab's father, I couldn't help but think about Jeff Bezos's grandfather, a guy named Lawrence Preston Geis, who Mark Kulak has done a huge amount of work on. And he was the head of the Western Division of the Atomic Energy Commission in the United States of America. And the last 4 years that he worked for the United States government, he was the director of finance for a new startup in the government called ARPA, that was then changed its name to DARPA. And then curiously, Bezos's mother got pregnant when she was very young, and married, and then divorced and moved back in with her parents. And so little Jeff was ostensibly raised by his maternal grandfather. So is it a coincidence that one of the first original 4 hires at ARPA, that his spawn becomes the wealthiest man in the world, running the biggest company? And so I look
I want to answer this question. I will answer this question, and I'm right around the corner from answering this question. So I'm actually working on something right now that answers this question.
Oh, good. Well, because I see parallels between Schwab and his father and Bezos and his grandfather. They seem
you are correct to see parallels. You are correct to see parallels in, number one, atomic and nuclear people who worked in those programs. Automatically, they've gone through checks. They've gone through secrecy. With their, like in Britain, it would be the Ministry of Defence would have screened them and would have gone through all of the checks. So, kind of people who work. I've received a word of evidence. I haven't found the evidence yet. Someone's found more evidence that proves that the Americans, either in Operation Paperclip or afterwards, were very interested in Eugene Schwab's knowledge. So Klaus Schwab's father's knowledge of the atomic program and what was going on. And of course, Eugene Schwab would suggest he moves over to Harvard in the center of where all this nuclear debate was going. Because if you were attached to the people who were on the forefront of the nuclear stuff, you've already been screened, you would already be deemed safe to work with. You would have already been checked out by multiple intelligence agencies. You would be known how clean you were, whether you were manipulatable, whether you could be manipulated.
Through the MICE rubric: money, ideology, compromise, ego.
And things like the International Seminar, where Henry Kissinger run, that was a CIA-funded program, was set up by the CFR grandee William Elliott Yandell originally, and with Kissinger put in charge. That is an exact, I think, place where you would take these people, and then you would connect them with the wider network of people who are within the nuclear industry. Because for them, I think, again, use the word emblematic, nuclear was emblematic at that time of the future, and so anything that was going to come from people who were in that field and doing that work, because they believe before they understood the idea of computer processing power properly, I think these people probably thought they could get some form of singularity or something, or boost in technology if they could get, and they would do, if they could get the technology of nuclear power, fusion and fission, like harnessed completely, then that would be it. So they were putting all of their eggs in that basket. But once they worked out that all sides with nuclear bombs were probably not going to fire those nuclear bombs unless it was an accident, all of their focus then becoming, well, let's develop more nuclear technology then. It doesn't matter. We could just keep doing it, trying everything. And so they would invest in all of this stuff. And you find the network always lays off. When you go to Bezos, I've gone back to 1700, I think, to about 1700, 1600 with Bezos's family. Pedersen, I think his name is.
Yeah.
Pedersen from Norway.
Yeah, in Mark's work, Barr pops up there too. William Barr, who was the Attorney General, who was.
I would love to talk about this more, and I soon will be able to talk about this more. But Jeff Bezos's origin story is a very carefully manipulated set of events that is also repeated over and over again in other people's origin stories who are completely connected with Jeff Bezos, and all have ended up being large entities in the in control of the bulk or the monopoly business within the internet world.
Yeah,
And that is no fluke. That is no bit of luck. That is very well manufactured by a certain group of people.
Well, I'm fascinated. I'm in line with your thinking, just tangentially from having. Again, I was a fashion photographer for 20 years, and then in the 90s, because I had a background in computer science, I went to work for 20th Century Fox, building websites for them, and then I went to work for Steven Spielberg, building video game places, and then I went to work for Richard Branson. So I worked for Rupert Murdoch, Steven Spielberg, and
you want to leave these off your CV. You don't want to be telling people.
Anyway, no. So I was I was in the offices with all these guys, kind of watching this stuff going on, swallowing the stories whole. Right, because I didn't know any better. And now that I'm out, I'm looking back and going, "What the hell was going on there?" Right. So I'm fascinated, and I can't wait to see what your next thing is.
It's quite amazing. I will tell you that it sails through not only Bezos, but there is Maxwell in there too. It's quite a fantastic little story, and it's helped me be able to see something as well that's structural. Something you can, like I say, that I'm starting to understand that you can fit the structure of people with pedophilic criminal behavior. You can see how they then use that same behavior in other parts of their life, and everything becomes like a form of, whether it be political, economic, whether it be influence or anything, everything is a form of grooming. Everything fits to the structure and paradigm of one type of profile, of one type of pedophile, and it's one connected with sadness, a want for power because they didn't have power when they were a child. Ghislaine Maxwell very much has that. Ghislaine Maxwell's childhood was messed up beyond. I mean, there was a very pseudo-sexual relationship between her and her father that was documented quite well by a young girl who seemed to be sexually fascinated with Robert Maxwell when she was younger, and documented later a woman called Elna Berry, who you can find videos on YouTube where she talks about some of her experiences about how Ghislaine chose which, whether it be a cat of nine tails she was whipped with by her father, or a riding crop, or another type of whip with some suspect. There was that sort of behavior. And when you hear about how they interacted with each other, the Maxwells were a very strange breed indeed. It was like somewhere in between family and business all of the time, and no one had any patience for anything that wasn't being productive. So that productive streak come out in what they did, because they wouldn't go to one place and do just one thing. They would do multiple operations at every place, and they kind of, like, you could probably categorize them into 4 different types of operations.
Mm-hmm.
They were always into like the sexual grooming stuff, but then there's also the just basically finding victims for compromise, powerful people. So they hang around with powerful people in powerful places. You at the same time, they recruit in places where they can recruit young girls as well. Also, young girls who aren't underage would know exactly what they're doing, but are amenable to power and money, so that they will join their little gang to recruit then younger girls, which was, there's layers and levels to all.
Yeah, I get it. I was in the fashion business for a while, and like I said, my job was to sell sweaters and bathing suits. That was my interest, but that attracts a certain type of person. And there's one story that I have. There was a woman who was trafficking. Okay, I found out later, but the way that I knew her was that she was the receptionist at a modeling agency in Los Angeles. And
oh, wow.
and before the internet, if I got a client, right, and they we were casting models, the modeling agencies have cards for the models that are in town. And they're always, the models are in a market like Los Angeles, there's always models flying in and flying out. So you don't ever actually know from week to week who's going to be here. So I would get a client, and then I would basically go on this little round robin thing where I would hit all the modeling agencies and I would pick up the cards of the girls that were available that day. A lot of people would do it by messenger, but I wanted to always kind of go in and touch base with the agents, because having a good relationship face to face with the agents, sometimes they would do favors. They would, do stuff for you that they wouldn't do if you were talking to them on the phone. And so I noticed in my 2 or 3 years of period that this woman went from being the receptionist from one modeling agency to another. Now, the normal job path, if you get a job as a receptionist at a modeling agency, is that you stay there for a while and then you get a job as a booker, right? You move up. You don't move from a receptionist to receptionist to receptionist to receptionist. And what I found out later is that she was trafficking. And it turns out that the best place in the world to find the women that you are describing, okay, they're older, okay, they desperately want to be models, which means that they want to make money from their attention, but they've just been rejected by a modeling agency. The best place to be sitting to be in a position to talk to all of those women is when they're coming out of the door of the modeling agency and they've just been rejected.
Completely.
They've started crying, right? Because this is the third agency that they've gone to that isn't going to represent them. And they get this kind hand on their shoulder going, "Oh, honey, it'll be okay. I can help you," right?
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that this woman was trafficking.
Yeah.
So
The lady I talked about earlier, the she who shall not be named. I named her Junkerman. Don't put it in the title at all. Don't put it in any of the descriptions or the videos tuned. Whatever platform it's on, you'll be surprised. She'll take down the platform. She owns loads of the platforms of loads of different things, including things like Revolut and stuff like that. Really, songs are all of that was her.
I just put up our warning for speculation. We're just speculating here.
Just speculate. Just speculate. No, she was elite modeling it. She was part of Elite Models, so she was in the same firm, the European branch.
I had a lot of.
I don't think she was actually put in there to be a model. She is extremely pretty back then, and etc., and she could get away with it. But when I actually hunted her down, I could only find one photo shoot that showed her in an elite modeling. And there's loads of modeling. I mean, I went.
Have you looked at the Philip Marlowe archive?
I have looked at every archive I possibly can, and you know what? It's really it's not the worst task to have to go through, but it is really surprising that as someone who was one of the main elite modeling agency books, has no there's no presence of her anywhere else, and I think it may have been just that's the way you make her look like a model so she can walk around and not be noticed, because her next steps were then to link up with Epstein. She's on the Lolita Express in September 2002, and that's how I noticed her originally, because I had broken down the Lolita Express flight manifest back in about 2016, 2017. I'd broken it down into patterns and basically discovered there was only 2 flights where people went on alone with Jeffrey Epstein and none of the entourage was there. So, and one of those was with Nicole Junkerman, and they came to Britain from Paris. They flew into Birmingham. I later, in the second article that I wrote, was able to find out that from a source who was there at the time, which was extremely wonderful to find. They flew from on a helicopter from Bristow, on a Bristow's helicopter from Birmingham to North Warwickshire mansion called Foxcote House, which is a hunting retreat for very rich people and owned by Abigail Wexner, of course, wife of Les Wexner, and boss and main funder to Jeffrey Epstein. Some say only funder to Jeffrey Epstein, but he was making his money all over the place, wasn't he? And they would meet there with 2 US senators. Metropolitan Police would supply police there, off-duty police would be there, and there would be Secret Service there. And I've been able to get rid of loads of the potentials of who it could be, because they were in America at the time. Senate was about to resume in just a couple of days after, and the first bill that would go through would be the child trafficking bill, the Amber Alert bill, and in a month later it would be the vote for the Iraq War. And so these guys were heavily involved in this. They were two US senators, I believe, from all my research, and I can only say that this is my best guess, from educated guess, is that it was Mike DeWine was one of them, and the other one was John Kerry. And John Kerry was already known to be the next runner for the Democratic leadership, most likely run again for the Democratic leadership against George Bush when it come up to the election that was going to happen in 2
Well,
years' time.
Bob Menendez had his accusers too. I mean, I think that was another example of American justice, where, but
I find American politics extremely interesting because it's just like watching gangsters back in the 20s.
I tweeted out yesterday, if you want to understand politics, just think of it as a gangster movie. That Biden is a gangster, Putin is a gangster, Trump is a gangster, Clinton is a gangster. If you think about them all as gangsters, the world just makes so much more sense.
And nation states are their territories. That's
right.
where the gangsters hang out. And so if you're saying, I agree with the gangsters having this territory or this territory, you're just becoming a gangster yourself. You're just the lowest level of
it's all a hood.
Complicit.
Right. It's all a hood at the end of the day. What hood do you belong to? Who's the boss?
It feels natural to go into that sort of area. I think. Do you want to hear a theory I have on Schwab?
Sure.
I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right or getting this right, but gene-mean co-interaction is a theory based around the idea that mimetically within culture over certain times, certain traits will be more likely to breed with other traits and express a certain type of character out. And it's how a mimetic sort of like cultural thing gets into the process of genes, because those genes are expressed more by them being successful within mating units. And Schwabia, where Schwab comes from, the name Schwab comes from Schwabia, Oberschwabia, is a very special region, and name Schwabia comes from Schwab, which means swap, so swap, to trade. And it was an area that was surrounded all throughout history by loads of different little empires. So you have Fide on the one side, and you had the Holy Roman Empire at the top, and you had the Franco Empire, you had the Lombardy Empire just down south, you had the Italian, Roman, whatever. You had over on the other side, you had Austrians, you had the changes coming over. And this place it was a very rich place, very affluent. Lots of people, always has been affluent. When people now protest in Germany against the rich people in Germany, they literally hold signs saying, down with Schwabia, because Schwabia is the place where all the rich schools are, where people like Prince Philip went to be educated. But that
Erwin Rommel was a famous Schwabian.
Yeah, so you got the idea that these people for a long time have had this idea that they're going to have to remain being safe by basically being diplomatic and trading and swap between nations that are around them who are warring. And that was a delicate process. The only way you could actually do that in history was to drop a lot of your ethics and morals and agree to sell weapons from here to here and here to here and here to keep the peace. But keep the peace in your own land, not everywhere else. And now if you look at Schwab and his father, Eugen Schwab, his father, was helping the Nazis with the atomic bomb program to help produce the atomic bomb. Schwab would create a company that at the time and afterwards, and this was reported within a Swiss inquiry, a proper professional inquiry, and a book that's all about it, would help the South African regime to try in its illegal and eventually unsuccessful nuclear weapon program. So they have this idea of exchanging and swapping information, but they don't seem to have an ethical boundary or a moral boundary to who they should swap. And I think that's been something that's like a gene-mean co-interaction over time. I think this area.
Well, he's also a third generation engineer from your studying, right? And so
lots of people are, and lots of the Schwabs have been involved in trade organizations, like in the top trade. His father also went on after upwards to be head of a trade organization in the region. So like a Ravensburg Trade Organization or
Right. So they're always they're trying to engineer these things, right?
Yeah,
you know,
and it's a really interesting. Now that's just me after I've seen all of the facts and I've done all of the research about the area and about the time. It just seems to be something that expresses out that these people go on about genes all the time and they go on about how genetics work. I don't think they really understand how genetics work and how simple we are as humans. And I don't think they can even see how it's affected themselves and how they act in the way, and how people from different countries are different because every country has had these pressures over time, and culturally we have adopted things which mean that those genes that get expressed are more likely to have big families and be richer and do all of those things, so are likely to spread more. I mean, it's a really simple idea, and their idea when they look at genetics is get rid of the weak. There's one day that's going to backfire on them. I think there's someone who's going to come along and say, no, you should get rid of the people who are most malevolent.
Well,
and that would be a real fuck up for them.
They say get rid of the weak, but I went to a conference once where there was this human biodiversity professor, and he was talking about how racial supremacy is a thing, and he went on to explain that if you're a white Northern European and you're in sub-Saharan Africa, the chances that you're going to die of some disease that you've never been exposed to within a few weeks of just being there, if you're not vaccinated or taking all the precautions, you're going to die, right? And that's because there are, there's generations of adaptation. That those people who live in those parts of the world know how to not die. Likewise, if you're from a northern latitude and you haven't overcome your ability to suspend, I'm always losing it, put off decision. What's the
do you mean delayed gratification?
Delayed gratification. I have a mental block on the expression delayed gratification.
I have loads of those, yeah.
So anyway, if you're a Northern European and you don't have delayed gratification, then you don't put away your seed corn. You don't put away your wheat. You eat it all during the winter, and then you starve the next year, right? And so there's this correlation between delayed gratification and weather and all kinds of other things that indicate that certain races are better in certain climates than other races. And that's just the way that it is. It doesn't have anything to do with anything else except adaptation, like you're talking about.
It doesn't have something to do with choice, like it makes you a bad person because
not
something in the culture. I love my country. When I talk about countries, I love my country, but then I got to learn about it properly. I love it even more. And most of the people who live in my country, I live in Wales, yeah? And Wales is a really, really ancient land. I mean, it's special. It's special in Britain and Europe for the fact that it's part of really the Appalachian Trail. If you've ever read Bill Bryson, Walk in the Woods, which is a brilliant book to read, he goes for a walk through the Appalachian Trail. Well, that trail, when it was breaking up, a little bit of it came across and whacked right into the side of Britain, and that made Wales. And so all of the rocks different, all of the land formations different. It makes for a really it's like Hobbitland up in Hobbiton. Sorry, when you get up into the valley, past the valleys and beyond, into the Black Mountains and the Brecon Beacons. It's wispy little windy roads with tiny little bridges that you have to duck under, and it's all beautiful and wonderful. And the actual place, Wales, is made up of 5 different tribes. You've got the martial lords, you've got the people who are the middle in between Wales and England, and they kind of come from an ancient tribe. The North Walian people come from an ancient tribe. They actually, all these are genetically different heliotypes, strands. These come from separate places around Europe. These are separate entities that have remained intact for over 1,400 years, even with everything we've had in modern industrialization, all the stuff coming in. People come in, they breed, and they end up getting homogenized into the tribal unit. And it hasn't changed in all that time. The landform, if you look at who were the power structure where the majority of the tribes lived back in 600 AD and compare it to the actual heliotype, the genetic heliotype now, a map, then you get exactly the same areas. You've got like Pembrokeshire, South Pembrokeshire, North Pembrokeshire are both different places. It's split by a line. Cornwall down in England, it's just like it's been Cornish. The people there are Cornish. They're an ancient tribe from years and years ago. They're all under this one banner, the United Kingdom. Up in the north, God, there's like 5, 6, 7 really distinct tribes that have still kept. The people of the Elmet, where Leeds is now, are still a distinctly different people than the French people who live in the southeast of England and have been the main power base and the main power rulers. And when you actually work out where all of the people lay and what the actual reality of it, you realize all of your belief of nation states and stuff is irrelevant, because what it is look at these beautiful little pieces of the jigsaw that never want to move away from each other, that love each other so much, that stick together, that find the difference between the other tribes. You know, there was that a famous experiment where the guy went to a tribe, a selection of tribes that used to come together, and they'd have a big fight, and they discovered that the people who were genetically similar and had the same ancestry automatically, even though they were from separate tribes who were distant from each other, would automatically join together to fight a common enemy, because it's in us. We can't get rid of us. It's something that's innate. The idea that we have a choice over it, and we have a choice over like feeling proud to be from somewhere and feeling akin to our people, is in itself racist. In itself is not accepting like culture and race as a thing that needs to flourish and be loved. Because I don't want to go down. When I go to North Wales, it's not only am I in Wales, which is wonderful, but I'm in a completely different part of Wales where they're completely and utterly different from me. We find them mental. We've got a derogatory term for them. We call them gogs. That's what we call them down in South Wales, you bloody gogs. And they call us a load of names, you know? That's
Right.
what they do. That's what we do. And when I used to go down to West Wales, I used to spend all my time in West Wales. The people in the north of Pembrokeshire were all a bunch of snobs and arseholes, in my opinion. And the people in the south were all crazy party animals who I loved loads and loads and loads. And I did feel that there was a difference between them, because I felt that from experiencing it. Now, someone from North Wales might go down to the north of Pembrokeshire and say, oh, these people are great, and the people in the south of Pembrokeshire are awful, because those lines get used to dealing with each other over time. And we've got to embrace that. We've got to embrace the fact that we are all different. And it's only pressure, like synthetic pressure on our cultures and our societies from outside is trying to break those bonds apart. And however many people you put into somewhere like London, they'll all stay in London, and the people outside still just marry within. And if any gene from foreign gene comes into that pool, it gets eventually just it'll a black man will fall in love with a white woman, and a black woman will fall in love with a white man. We all know the thing, but eventually you will have someone over time who's of the region, of the place, and looks like everybody else. It makes no difference. It's not a racist thing that we love each other. It's not a racist thing that we choose to go live somewhere where we feel culturally akin to. And the destruction of culture comes from the lack of knowledge of who we really are and where we really come from. And then when you work out where we really are, you realize all the rest of it is just tosh. For me, most of the power, like hungry people, emanate from this one group of people who shares this island we live on. And there is roughly, I think, 16 or 17 different tribes sharing this island, this little island of Great Britain, and no one realizes that they're split into a few different countries, and they all like argue amongst each other and don't realize the Southwest doesn't give any money to the North, doesn't give any money to Wales.
But the argument is engineered. They want you to argue with one another because they don't want you to actually celebrate each other's differences. I mean, we use these platitudes like diversity is our strength and blah 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 blah, but they really want everybody to be homogeneous. There's an insidious book that somebody had me read last year, and it's a great book from an academic standpoint. It's a school assignment if you want to read it. It's called Seeing Like a State. It is not on my book list because I don't recommend the book because it's more torture than reading. But the net of that book is that the bigger the state is, the larger the whether or not if you're going from a county to a state to a country to a global organization, the bigger the organization, the worse it becomes at being able to manage any kind of specific detail. Because and they in the book they give forest management as kind of like one of the cases that they go through. But I was watching a video on Michael Crichton, rest in peace, who did a speech about how the Americans completely screwed up Yellowstone National Park in trying to preserve it. And it was the forest rangers that destroyed the park, right? Because they were trying to preserve it. The more that the bigger the group. So that was the federal government. The forest rangers were working for the federal government. They destroyed Yellowstone National Park. The Indians used to come through and they used to do controlled burns. And now we have kind of woke forestry where we're not allowed to do any kind of controlled burns anymore. And instead, we have these fires where millions of acres of forest get burned because controlled fires are not allowed anymore. So anyway,
I think there's a problem. I have to say, just to interject very quickly
Yeah.
there. I think there's a real problem with what their tactics are is to drive us into cities for a reason, because as custodians of the land, we have a responsibility to protect the land from people who want to do bad to it. And people will say, well, you can't overpopulate the land. But in Britain, when you ask someone, I asked someone the other day in the park who was going on about global warming, how we're all overpopulated. And I said, how much of the UK do you think is built on? How much of the UK do you think is built on? A really simple question. And he said, well, definitely over 8%. And then he started going on about how there was so much around. I said, well, it's under 1%. It's, that's something you type into Google, how much of the UK is built on, and the BBC itself on Google will say, amazing fact, it's less than 1% is built on, because no one expects it. Everybody expects it's much more. The reason they want you off the land is you can no longer be a custodian of the land that you care for, and they will be able to pollute the rivers. It's not about the land. Yeah, they can frack the land all they like, but what they are after is polluting the rivers. They don't want to have to take their waste from here and take it there and dispose of it properly. It's been a big problem with all industry throughout the entirety of the Industrial Revolution and beyond, is that they do not want to dispose of waste properly, and they will dump it in the local rivers. And the rivers are the veins of every single community. They're the veins of the land, and the more they do that, the more people who live on the land complain and put pressure, and the more that these big people who are detached from our society, because they're trying to make such a big state, they're so detached that what they do is automatically say, well, we've got to push these people into the city to stop them complaining. Not we've got to sort out the problem where they're actually destroying the main source of water that goes through land. That's the most important for people. This idea that it's all overpopulated. People go from a train to a station, and they see population, and all the time in between they're sitting there reading their books and not looking out the window. And if you looked out the window, you would see that if you put those train tracks next to each other and any buildings around, you've got loads of space everywhere, and they convince you they're not, because they're busy trying to do their dirty business on it. And at the same time, they're telling you that it's because of overpopulation, which everybody will see all around them because they're crowded into cities, so it seems believable. It's overpopulation. That's the reason why all of this water's messed up, all of the seas are full of plastic, and all of the rest of it is due to global warming, because it's human and it's all man-made. And so they'll use all that, and when it doesn't work, they'll say, oh, then it's global dimming, and it'll go backwards and forwards. And they've had to stop on climate change now. When I talk to people who say global warming, I they've changed the line. It's climate change.
Well, that's why they have to have a pandemic, then they have to have a war, then they have to, because they got to mix it up, because they can't keep the same drum going.
But we are custodians of the land, is the point. We are custodians of the land. We're supposed to be there. There's supposed to be people watching these bastards, these gets. I'm trying to control my language. I probably don't need need to.
You don't need to. Yeah, it's fine.
No, we gotta be watching these bastards because they do want to destroy the main sources of water within the land without us complaining. And I have literally that guy who I talked about who had land polluted. That was because they dumped chemicals under some land. And I wear his jacket that he gave me, and all of the time, I wear it. A nice long jacket. He could not even wear it by the end. He was so thin from stage 4 cancer. I wear it all of the time, and it reminds me all of the time what they are trying to do and what they will do if they can get their way, which is reduce the population by being complete arseholes all of the time and making sure we have nothing good to drink unless it comes from in a plastic bottle. That's it.
Yeah, well, you're doing a fantastic job in uncovering all of this stuff, and I cannot wait to see what the next thing that you come up with is. Addy, do you have any questions? Because I need to jump out of here for 1 second. So
sure. Well, how much time do we got, Mr. Vedmore? Do we have a bit more?
Hey, I'm happy to sit around. I've run out of tea, but I can live with that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I do have some questions, Peter. If you
okay, I'll be right back.
Okay. I wanted to ask about really how you started doing this work, and if it was something growing up you wanted to do, you dreamed about doing it, or was it more of an accident to like myself and Peter a bit? And then I wanted to actually talk a bit more about getting paid as a writer too, and what that's been like. You kind of mentioned it a bit earlier, but if you want to touch on any of those things I just mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, it's really nice to be also able to explain to people how I got here, because there are a selection of things in my life, and some of it is family orientated, of course. I mean, I grew up in a really weird situation when I was young, because we were in something called the Sealed Knot, which was a war reenactment society of the Civil War. It was really big, so there was 8,000 people on a campsite on a weekend, like all dressed up in 17th century clothes. I was always dressed up in 17th century clothes every weekend. I a sword in my hand. My dad had claymore and everything like that. He was a commanding officer of a regiment, and I would have this like world where I went to school normally and did these normal things, and every weekend we had thousands of people partying on a field, all dressed up with cannons going off in the background and loads of people turning up to watch, and all the money goes to charity. That's all very nice. So I had these like this weird world where I'd go home, and we'd also, like, on the weekends we weren't going away. We were also forced to go to church, and I was obviously not religious from a very early age, or not into a religious structure. I'm very spiritual as a person, and I believe that everything that is said to me by another spiritual person is translatable to me without the need for any type of book or anything, because it's all about if you're doing good or if you're doing bad. And I had loads of like experience in school of violence. I went to a primary school that had a head teacher called Mr. Jones, who used to beat up the kids regularly. I saw like a kid's head got stamped on. We were taken in, given the slipper, and we'd come out and laugh, and then he'd give us the slipper again. He'd put our heads against the radiator and bang our heads and stuff. And he was a real nasty piece of work, and it was really like a small school, and there was lots of really rough families there, so there was a lot of abuse around there. And then when I was about 9, I got groomed as well by a paedophile, a man who I can name out loud. We went for a court case. Paul Avanci, who changed his name later to Paul Reese. He groomed, he molested a lot of people. During the time that I didn't say anything, I spent 2 years in silence, shitting myself, as this guy was coming around my house all the time. He had befriended my family and stuff. And I went through this like, oh, it's a terrible experience. You're 9, 10 years old and you're getting groomed by a paedophile. It's not a nice experience at all. And I eventually told my parents about.
Wow. Talk about bad timing.
My camera's gone off.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Hey, are you back?
Did I disrupt it by coming back in? I'm gonna.
There you go. Hi. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, I was going through this whole period, and then I ended up saying to my mum about it when he came over the house one time, that he was grooming, basically my own words, when I was 10, 11 years. Basically, he was arrested. It turned out he had molested a child during that time, a 3-year-old, and that got told to me. Yet no counselling was offered to me, and I ended up going through this thing where I had to go through like the sit-in with the double screens and stuff with the mirrored windows, give my police testimony about the whole thing, and then afterwards he got a suspended sentence for molesting a kid and for grooming me for 2 years. He got a suspended sentence for 9 months, a slap on the wrist, and he was allowed to return to this organization that I was in, and just he was present in my life then for another 5 years. The police wouldn't do anything, the organization wouldn't do anything. The whole thing was terrible, and this is the whole thing was an experience that led me to say, okay, I'm pretty much alone, because my family basically got fed up with me saying what was going on, and told me be quiet, in no uncertain terms, and that led me to be a bit of a fire starter as a kid. So I went around doing awful things, breaking into houses. We'd mainly phone up porn lines on people's phones and stuff, doing naughty things all of the time, and being a menace to society because there was nothing else to do. I just stopped going to school for about 3-4 months, and no one even noticed, I don't think.
You were
I was
acting out.
constantly doing naughty things. I was never given the opportunity to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Basically, I was always doing naughty things from my youth, because I had had all of this negative experience, and society never fitted in for me. It never worked out for me, because I always saw like the hypocrisy behind it, because I would always be told one thing and another thing would happen, and so I was told I was protected when I was young, and that I would never have to see him again if I told this evidence to the police, and it was bullshit. It was bullshit. They knew fully well that they wouldn't do anything and nothing would happen. The whole system was corrupt to protect people anyway. That guy would hang out outside the toilets in the local supermarket where my sister worked for years afterwards as well. And even though you could report to security, they wouldn't move him. You could report to the police, they wouldn't take him out. The whole system was a fraud to me very early on. And my high school system didn't change anything. Kids were still being hit up until when I was about 14 years old was the last time. The kids who went there, because they were mostly like the bad kids, were expelled from violence all over the place, and everybody was upset with each other, and everybody was having a hard time. Everybody was living in poverty. So it's obvious that I was going to end up doing. Go on.
Do you think that he was part of a bigger system? That is, Kathy O'Brien kind of famously talks about in her book Transformation of America that, you know, her father was an abuser, but he was when he was rounded up by law enforcement, when they originally caught him, he was offered an out by providing basically groomed children or grooming children for intelligence operations, basically. And so there was a network of these people, these pedophiles, that they were taken into law enforcement, that they were being managed, as it were, in order to provide, you know, the grist by which their evil engine runs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
well, I think there's something that I experienced in Cardiff, where I grew up, was a lot of people, a lot of police were corrupt. Just some of the most corrupt police in the whole of Britain. They were well known for being corrupt. There's loads of cases of corruption. And sorry, go on.
Is that where the Who did Quadrophenia? Was that Cardiff?
Sorry?
Is Cardiff where the Who the Who movie Quadrophenia, was that Cardiff?
Yeah. Oh, again, it cut out. Did you say the Who?
Yeah, the Who, the movie Quadrophenia.
Wait 1 second. I'll see if
Okay.
I can sort this out.
You can hear
So,
me okay, Peter?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. It seems like there's quite a bit of a delay between you two guys. But
Yeah, probably when I ducked out and came back in, it screwed everything up.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Hey, how's it going? Sorry about this, gang. I do apologize. I think it's partially the internet's been really bad over this side of the world, so
Yeah.
maybe leaving the door open a little bit and my mate doing other than watching stuff. So hopefully that might help out. Otherwise, it might just be a case of ducking out. Can you hear me now?
Not that well, but one of the things that I was thinking is that I left and came back out, so maybe I'll take you out and bring you
Yeah, I
back
think you
in.
might have
Let
to
me,
duck
let me
out.
hang on. No, one second.
Yeah.
Remove, add. I took you out and then I added you back
Hello.
to see if that resets something. Did that reset something?
It's still going.
Can you hear us, Mr.
Okay,
Vedmore?
I'm sorry about this, gents.
That's okay.
That's all right.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah, I can. I'm sorry about this, gents. I'm sorry about that. The early hours of the morning, they like messing with the internet, me bet. So it might be muff on my end. I don't know. It might just be a glitch. Basically, my whole life has been a collection of seeing behind a load of curtains. And by the time it reached about 2000, 2001, and September the 11th happened, all of that sort of stuff, it was obvious that I would have to learn what was real. So I've been on a journey ever since. And now, basically, in about 2014, 2015, I realized all the systems were a scam, and it was time to get off my ass. And the best way to do it for me, and the way I succeeded in resetting my mind, is I come down to the point where I was suicidal, and so it was like, I had no other place to turn. It was either death or justice. It was either learn to get over it or just give up. And I went up to the valleys, I went up to the hills, just actually about 3-4 miles away from my house. Walked up there and I picked a load of mushrooms on the hillside, and I took time out of life for about 6 months and listened to every album I loved and got in touch with my spirit and my soul. And then I cleaned up off nearly all of the drugs I had been on previously. I stopped doing painkillers. I got to the point where people had been feeding me morphine, really nasty people as well. They were just trying to get me hooked onto something, and they knew I was at the lowest level. And it was like, at that time, it was like, well, I've just come out of the near-death experience. It's time to say, no, I'm not going to take it anymore. Just like we've heard over and over again, we shouldn't take it anymore. We just shouldn't take it anymore. Get up out of your seat and scream out the window,
Here.
It was a case of going through a process of learning how to tell people what was going on that I could see, and for that, of course, you have to understand. And I'm not someone who likes to say something that's going to turn out to be false. I really was. From the very start, I realized that I just basically got to put down evidence, and it might not actually make for a good read. It might not be a good read. So the first real story I did was Laura Koonsberg, who was a BBC political, and I was like, she's so bias is unbelievable. I want to expose BBC bias, like no one knew. Simplistic start to journalism. And I went back through a family history and discovered loads of like horrible stuff and dirty stuff about her ancestors. They were not nice people. Her dad ran a sweatshop. Managed to get a right not to give workers' rights to the people in his company when everybody else in the country, I think it was Peru, were. Eckhart von Koonsberg, her grandfather, had been at the Schwabian school alongside Prince Philip in the 30s, and went on to help reform the NHS and create the NHS originally in the image of the rich, of course, which was supposed to be a free to the point of use public service, but I mean, is more a way to siphon illegal sort of gangster money out through things. So that was like, that was an eye opener to me, that I put it out there, and a load of people were interested in it because they realized that, oh well, look, there's a load of history to this person, that's why they're there. And really it was that point where it was like, okay, well, the next step is obviously I've got to aim up higher. She's nothing. The BBC are nothing. They're worthless. What's the point? They're a dying business. It's obviously they're dying. And as soon as you realize that, you're like, why am I even? So I went higher, and I went Theresa May. It's coming up to the elections in 2017, 2016, around then. I can't really remember because she called another election a year later. But she was up against Jeremy Corbyn, and like, I'd been brought up under Labour by a socialist father. I must support Jeremy Corbyn in my eyes. Like, you know, like still only 5 years ago, I was stuck in that sort of paradigm until I worked out that it's all just, I saw the structure.
Guilty.
Yeah, I know, we've all been there. And I really did believe that there could be change. And so I looked at a different angle than everybody else with the election. I looked at Theresa May's father, and I did the same thing as I did with Laura Kuenssberg's story. I thought, if she's shady, she's probably come from shadiness. Let's have a little look. And then I found this amazing the fact that her father had worked with John Bodkin Adams in Eastbourne Hospital. He was a chaplain. Her father was a chaplain of the hospital, the main guy for religious stuff. And John Bodkin Adams had killed over 130 people, recorded, definite, maybe more, they say. He had them sign him into their wills, and then he'd give them a rejection and they die. And then he'd take all their stuff. He did it to 132 definite people. At the time, it was covered up by Lord Gwyn, I think it was.
And whose father was that?
Theresa May. No, John Bodkin Adams wasn't Theresa May's father.
Yeah.
But Hubert Brazier was her father, and would have seen all of this, and it was a big cover up at the time, and he would have been like, the person giving last rites, the person going down to the mortuary, being with the families and stuff. This was 132 people this guy killed over a very short period, including a very famous actress, so he couldn't have not known. But then the whole thing was covered up, hush hush. The guy wasn't even sent to prison. He was given a little slap on the wrist, fined or whatever, told he couldn't work for a little bit, and then 10 years later he was a doctor again. So it was insane. And then afterwards, Hubert Brazier went from being this little chaplain guy in Eastbourne Hospital. They gave him another little thing, but then they suddenly send him to the richest area, the most beautiful Vicar of Enstone up in Oxfordshire, in the heart of the elite. Suddenly he goes all the way up there after that cover up. That's nice, isn't it? Everybody said the right thing. Everything got hushed up really nicely. John Bodkin Adams got off from killing 130 people. And this guy got moved up from Sussex up to Oxford. Now, what's really interesting at the time was there was a sexual abuse inquiry going on in the UK at the time, and the majority of people who were involved in it were in the same region her father was in at the same time they were committing their crimes. He would have been knowing all of these people. They were all sharing each other, all of it. And his daughter was covering that up. Her daughter had installed 3 different people at the head of the inquiry. The first one had lunch with Leon Britton on many of occasions. And Leon Britton was once Home Secretary and was also involved in loads of paedophilia abuse, including the Elm Guest House stuff. And then the next one was connected with people, and the next one was connected. They all had to stand out. And it was like, it was obvious like cover up from a woman whose father was involved in another extreme cover-up in the past. So that went round to like 250,000 people read that in no time whatsoever. And I had no ability to get out. I had no real platform or anything. It just got out to loads of people all of a sudden. And people were really interested. And after that, it was like, well, now I've got to find the truth. And the truth has been really hard to uncover. And it was only through understanding it from the paradigm of intelligence agencies, how they work, where first you're looking for the roots of the people in the intelligence agencies. Once you've tackled the people who are at the top of government, you're like, well, who's above them? Oh, intelligence agencies, turns out, are above them. They're the ones who are really, and intelligence agencies. And then who forms those intelligence agencies? Where do they come from? What arms do they have? what things do they do that affect wider society? So in the last article I wrote, you've got Henry Kissinger leaving Harvard in 1951 after he's applied to be a FBI spy, and George Bundy and William Elliott Yandell say you should go and work for the CFR instead. So he goes works for the Council on Foreign Relations and does all the nuclear disaster plan. And that's where the real power lays. That's where the people behind the curtain, and that comes from somewhere too. And then what do? These people work at implementing policies. They workshop, they game. All through the 50s, Henry Kissinger was gaming out scenarios for nuclear weapons alongside foreign policy. So foreign policy, they knew, would be intricately linked with nuclear weapons and the Cold War and all of that for the foreseeable future. So these people are so well ahead of the game. They're so it's trying to catch up with them is going back now 60, 70, 80 years, and that's where the power lies. The power lies that far in the past, and we're still allowing it. We still got this consensual relationship that we're not taking control of. We should have consent in this. We should be able to say, I don't want to live by the idea of what the real Dr. Strangelove thought in 1967 would be our future. I want to see what future we can put together now that would be much nicer. One of consent, and if we don't get consent, you can't do it. So you can't manipulate things just to get just so you can get your consent, like they've done through COVID. That isn't real consent. That's illegal. We all know it's an illicit form of illicit behavior by a power to keep us in a state where we say yes, but we don't mean yes because we don't know what yes means. And this is people just it's like we've regressed as well. Since as soon as Ukraine happened, it's like we regressed in our talking points and our opinions back to the 1950s and 1960s, which was really interesting because I was studying this article just at that time where suddenly it became the nuclear paradigm again. And I was just like, I was reading what they were saying on the news in my research for the article before they had started with the rhetoric again, and I knew the rhetoric was coming anyway. I mean, you know what's going to happen,
right? Well,
the playbook is obvious.
I mean, the thing that they obviously have gamed out to the nth degree is how people can be manipulated by the media. When I found out that the first three presidents of American television networks came directly out of military intelligence psychological warfare operations, is that an accident? And when you start to get into predictive programming and understanding that all of these shows are I grew up in Hollywood. And everybody in Hollywood's got a screenplay, right? And everybody thinks that they've got the best idea for the next great movie. And then you see these slates of movies that come out year after year, and you don't understand what is the process that the motion picture industry uses in order to greenlight a script. And when you start to realize that, it's because there's a list of psychological profiles that need to be filled, and there's a bunch of direction that society needs to be going in, and that the think tanks are coordinating with the banks. I worked for the Hollywood Stock Exchange. I helped build and design one of the only websites that I ever worked on that actually still exists right now, hsx.com. And hsx.com allows people to trade virtual shares. It was the first digital currency. The Hollywood dollar, invented by Max Kaiser, was the first digital currency on the internet.
Always going to be Max Kaiser, isn't it?
Okay, well, Max and I are good friends. We've been friends for 25, 30 years.
I watched. Yeah. I spent about 6-7 years watching Max Kaiser.
And Stacy, God bless her, called me the David Bailey of Santa Monica. So, David Bailey is one of my favorite photographers. So that was like a great. That was a great compliment. But the idea. Boy. But the original idea of the Hollywood Stock Exchange was that Michael Burns, who is now the co-chairman of Lionsgate, and Max wanted to create a what they called a Big Six certified trading engine, meaning they wanted to create an online trading engine where people could buy and share stocks in movies in order to be able to. They wanted to take this market and they wanted to move it from a game to the real world. That is, if an IPO for a movie if a movie costs $100 million, okay, and an internet corporation costs $100 million, then why shouldn't you be able to IPO a movie, okay, and sell shares in the movie? It's the new Schwarzenegger movie. It's going to have this plot. We've got all of these people lined up. It's written by this people. Why shouldn't anybody be able to come in and buy a part of that movie? And that, when they finally got in front of the Security and Exchange Commission, the other 7 movie studios lined up against the Hollywood Stock Exchange, and Lionsgate at that point was trying to champion this stuff and said there's no way. And they basically made it so the Security and Exchange Commission would never approve that. And I never really kind of understood that. Why? I thought it was the banks wanting to be in control of the media, and I didn't really understand why they wanted to be in control of the media, why they had anything against some kind of a populist media movement happening. And as soon as I started to, in the last couple of years, as soon as I started to figure out predictive programming and the understanding that these movies are chosen for a reason, these stories are being put out in, it's all covered by the Jungian, I don't know if it's crap or not, collective consciousness. Well, if the collective consciousness is all being shaped by the media that everybody is consuming on all of the screens every day.
Completely. One of the things that I go through in the last article about Schwab, of course, is one of his mentors is the real Dr. Strangelove. I think that movie was put out in a sense to ready people for a change in rhetoric, because they had been scaring people for so long about the nuclear threat. And then they brought out this movie that showed how absurd nuclear deterrence was and how it could end up with people on the same base in America fighting against each other and no one knowing who the enemy is, and how crazy it was. And that helped lighten people's mood about nuclear weapons. I mean, there's so much to it. And the person who's the right hand of Klaus Schwab, Richard Edelman, his father, Daniel J. Edelman, was psychological operations during the war for the US. I mean, he got into that's the biggest PR firm in the world, represents over 70% of all governments, all political entities, all people or companies that think they're people or
Endelman was actually too. Again, I was working at News Corp in '93 when the browser was Mosaic, when the first web server Apache was created, and you couldn't even connect a database up to a web server. There was no way to do that. And the first company that had somebody who was blogging about the internet was Endelman. And I don't remember the guy's name, but that was the first time that I ever heard Endelman, was because they had this guy that was writing about internet stuff every day.
They know what's going to be popular before anybody else, and they've made that a definite thing by 2000, and still running is the Edelman Trust Barometer every year at the World Economic Forum, and they love to tell the people, the elites, exactly what's going to happen in the next few years. So if you want to know what's going to happen in the next few years, you just watch the Edelman Trust Barometer, and you go back a couple of years, and you're like, oh, gits, they planned this out, they knew this was coming in advance, like the flip over of fake news. For people were calling BBC fake news, CNN fake news, and then they said out loud in the Trust Barometers like 2015, 2016, we're minus 80% trust in the media out of the top 4 that they look at, top 4 like group corporations and things like that, government. They said that we're going to have to redefine what fake news is. And then do
you think Orwell was giving a wink when he called Big Brother, because isn't the BBC the Big Brother corporation?
Yeah, I really do feel that the BBC have a special place in hell. There is obviously something about Orwell and Huxley and those people revolving in the same circles with all the people who were workshopping this sort of stuff very early on.
Yeah, it's hard to tell whether or not Orwell is a good guy or a bad guy. right?
Yeah, I know,
Yeah.
I know, I know. And I see some like memes and stuff of him reading like 2022 and looking shocked and stuff, and how funny that is. But I don't think he would be shocked in the least. He would probably love part of it because it would give him loads of material to write more books by basically listening to what his mates are saying, because
Right.
that's really what he did.
Yep.
He created, and it's the same that this is what I argue. The same thing Klaus Schwab is doing. He had a mentor that Kahn. He wrote Herman Kahn would write a piece called "The Year 2000" in 1967, and it would predict basically all the technologies that we haven't even reached yet and more. And it's amazing. It's like stuff I've never even thought about. Some of the stuff that comes at the end of it, and some of it was really big warnings. But Schwab is just using it as a tip sheet to things that they can achieve, we can achieve, whether or not the consequences of it are bad. And that comes from that sort of nuclear deterrent sort of mindset of the 50s and 60s.
So Herman
And
Kahn,
it
Herman Kahn is the
narrative.
author?
Herman Kahn is the author of 1967, of the year 2000, that was written in 1967 while he was working for the State Department between 1966 and 1968. He was officially, he's the head of the Hudson Institute at that time.
I'll have
And
to
at the
go
same
find
time,
that.
yeah, a really interesting document. At the same time, if you look on the archives.org, you'll find, or look in the article, it's linked in there, you'll find the ancillary document that was written at the same time that was showing how all of these things that are going to be introduced in the future are going to mean that we need to concentrate on leadership group and creating a leadership group separate from society, making universities like a kind of dull place where we select our administrators for as the leadership group, and basically mapped out the World Economic Forum Young Global Leader Project, which was actually happening at the same time, and where Schwab would meet Herman Kahn and was the international seminar back in 1967, which was a summer school, and people like Pierre Trudeau also went to that as well, and then went on to be leaders. So it's like that was the first like moment of it, and it would move on from there. Everything that we see now is just a more complicated version of what's in the past. That's the only templates they have and the only templates they use. So when we see the reversion back to the nuclear threat and evil Russia and the Russian bear, it's seriously them
The
just
same playbook.
having no ideas anymore. No ideas since 1967. They're still on
Well,
that playbook,
and that's why,
think
and the same thing is happening in Hollywood. People, again, there are thousands of creative scripts in Hollywood that, idealistic writers who have written the greatest story ever told moved to Southern California, and they try to get their story sold, but instead we continually remake comic book movies, and and
the worst, they've ruined nearly all comic book movies. I love, I do love comic book art. I love a load of stuff like that. I'm really geeky. Grew up with all of that sort of
I
stuff.
used to.
And then they turned it into something which was like, when I used to buy the comics, when I used to buy like a Spider-Man comic, I wouldn't go for Amazing Spider-Man, because that was the polished version of Spider-Man. I would go for Web of Spider-Man or Spectacular Spider-Man, because they were edgy stories about psychological conflict between friends and stuff like that, and other things that were a little bit darker. And some of the offshoots would get really dark for a little bit, like when Spider-Man, just that title came out in 1990, and suddenly everything was really dark and awful in there, and it was much more like a Batman sort of style comic. People now have only got can only watch Amazing Spider-Man version of Spider-Man, because that's the thing that will sell to kids. That will be the thing that sells to kids, and it dumbs down society. And I was there when I was in my early 20s, desperate for a Spider-Man movie to come out, desperate to see my favorite heroes on screen, and when they do, I'm just googly-eyed, and then over time it's like, oh my god, they've just made it so it's just like a polished doll. They do that to everything. They polish it because the people they call in for the sample groups to test out all of this stuff on, so they obviously, they're selected from society, and society, it's like a self-repeating cycle, or it just keeps going in a circle.
Yeah, I just feel lucky, because when I was working at 20th Century Fox, and I started working, I was building internet websites for Rupert Murdoch. I would drive around the lot in my golf cart watching them make movies, and the more that I could see how movies were made, the less interested they were to me. That is,
Yeah.
it was kind of like knowing the magician's tricks.
It's like politics. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like politics at the stage when you realize that all the politicians have been put into place, and really the gerrymandering has been so bad that there's just a load of people who
If
are
you're lucky,
represented.
if you're lucky, it's gerrymandering. I mean, in the United States in 2020, I think it was just wholesale fraud. But anyway, Addy, do you have any other questions? Wait, I don't hear Addy.
No, I don't hear Addy.
Yeah, I
Oh,
had my
there we
mic muted there. You guys can hear me now, presumably.
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just you guys are blowing me away with your topics there, and just talking about the Star Wars stuff. It just making me think about stories and how they're written, and how there's it's like always a happy ending, right? And
I watched the first 3 Star Wars movies, and then there was a gap, I don't know, 10 years or something before the second 3 were made. And then I think I was working at Fox when the 4th movie came out. And I went and I saw it, and I was kind of like nonplussed by it. And I'm not sure that I've seen a Star Wars movie since then. Maybe I saw the 5th one, but I kind of lost interest because I was a big fan of Empire Strikes Back. But see, Empire Strikes Back is an interesting movie because when that movie was made, George Lucas was so busy spinning up Lucasfilms that he didn't really have much to do with that movie. Irwin Kershner directed it.
that was his professor, right?
Irwin Kershner?
Didn't he let one of his old teachers direct a movie?
It might, yeah. I don't know what his relationship was. I always call it the KKK because it was Irwin Kershner was the director, Lawrence Kasdan was the writer, and the producer was Gary Kurtz. So Lucas didn't have anything to do with that movie, and that
It's a fantastic, like Star Wars is a fantastic example for the degradation of culture, really, because Star Wars, first one, like A New Hope, was like so astounding, but it was an accident by all accounts. It was like the first cut was terrible, and someone had to go in and recut it all up and fix it to make it actually better, and then it became this legend, and then from it become this masterpiece that was Empire Strikes Back, and then the semi-half masterpiece that was Return of the Jedi, because I'm not sure the Ewoks can be possibly classed as masterpiece. It becomes comedy, and this is really interesting because after a certain amount of time, when you concentrate on anything, you start to see absurdity too much, and that I think comes out in people's work. And by the time it got to the next selection, the Phantom Menace and onwards, it got more and more absurd, and I hated them at the time. And when I watched the Phantom, I won a competition in the South Wales Echo on the first day to go watch the premiere, the day before, like to go watch the premiere of it, and me and my mate went, and we come out, we were like, I don't know if we like it. You know, we're 18
right,
years old.
exactly.
Like, I'm not sure what just happened to me. I think I might have just been abused, but I'm not sure. I'm going to pretend I like it for as long as possible. So did that.
I'll go see it again. I'll go see it again and make sure that I
The second one was like the worst type of drawl crap that you could imagine, and it was like they're ruining it. Okay, this is terrible. And then the third one I couldn't be bothered with, but then it changed because when they brought out the new ones, I had already got into the point where I had looked back on the last 3 that they had made, and they had become 3 of my favorite movies because they're so silly, they're so stupid. They become they're the king of memes when it comes to movies. I mean, hello there. Obi-Wan by Ewan McGregor is a beautiful thing. Anakin Skywalker, he's so bad. He's so bad. The kid Skywalker, the middle one is so terrible. And you're so happy when he's a junkie, because that's all he is in the third one. He's a junkie who's like got super powerful junk, and he's I need more. And then he kills the kids. I mean, what the hell?
right.
And at the time, I was just like, no, I'm not interested. But the actual fact that the whole idea and the political situation, the amount of understanding of politics they put into it is also astounding, and it put amazing metaphors on your plate for understanding that the Jedis weren't the good guys and the dark side weren't the good guys. The good guys were the people who were suffering underneath, and all of these guys have these ideologies that mix up, and they believe that it's all about them and it's all about their power.
And in the meantime, billions of other people are getting blown up while they're having their pissing contest, right?
Yes, and
Yeah.
when you see the end, what's really interesting is by the middle, they've created like these clones and stuff, and then they're fighting against droids, and so it's like where we can see our future going. It was like where we can see us versus machine. It's like a commentary on us versus machine, in a sense, the middle sort of section of Star Wars. And then they brought out to the most recent ones, and you already knew what was going to happen because Disney got control of it, and they kicked out George Lucas and stuff. You already knew what was going to happen. And again, the first one, I watched it and I felt again like I didn't know if I liked it or not, and I felt like I'd been abused because there were so many winks and nods, and I was so happy to see Han Solo hanging around, but it was also I can feel horrible and sick watching this. I watched it over and over again until I was like, I can't watch it anymore. I feel sick in my mouth. And then the next two was so bad. It was such a destruction of the entire history of Star Wars. They completely and utterly went with subverse expectations, even when, like, you know, the fact is that Star Wars worked because you always had to have the desperation for the good to happen, not the good be so powerful that nothing can stop it. That doesn't allow for a story to develop. That doesn't allow for you to attach to characters, and it became what we see with the Marvel movies and everything, just a polished version of these characters that were created in the past that will only attract children because thinking human beings.
Well, Joseph Campbell was still alive when Star Wars was made, and Joseph Campbell comes directly out of that Changing Images of Man project, right? And Lucas claimed that he was good friends with Joseph Campbell when he wrote the screenplay of that movie. And, you know, my idea at this point for the ultimate speculative fiction is who's the committee in Hollywood that's actually putting these directors and together with these psychologists in order to tell them what movies they're going to make, because that's the story that I think that needs to get told. It's not the story of Star Wars. It was like how Star Wars was really made, which was somebody at Rand Corporation or Tavistock Institute published a white paper, and then Henry Kissinger handed it to somebody and said, "Go get Spielberg to work on this, or go get go find somebody."
Do you know what the real evidence that shows that something like that happened within Star Wars is? That all 6 of them were written. That is crazy. You imagine you decide to start in the middle of the place where you actually write in, and you've written all of these different movies already up and prepared it so well. That's just, I don't think that's a regular thing in movies unless you've got a massive budget.
It's not.
What they say, the story they say is that he didn't necessarily have a massive budget, so he was working for ages just for writing 6 movies. That seems like a lot of work to put in, that if it isn't got an extra reason or extra bit of, and I think maybe at the time you could say that there was a movie space race, a race to make space movies.
I think I have it in a box in my garage, and you can probably find it on the internet. But I did used to work at Universal Studios in the 1980s as a creative director, and at one point, a friend of mine dropped one of the original, because one of the things about studio production offices, especially if you're in the producer's building at Universal, is like one entire wall is stacked with screenplays that people have been given to read. And one of the ways that you could make extra money if you were working in the production office is that they would pay you $10 a script to go read a script. So you'd read a script, and they had a 3-page questionnaire, right, that you would fill out. You'd read the script, and then you would answer the questionnaire, and it was part of the way that they processed just the sheer number of screenplays that they got. Everybody in the studio wants to make a movie. They all think they know about movies. Well, here's your test. Read this script and tell us what you think about it. So I think, one of the original drafts of Apocalypse Now, okay, written by George Lucas. And it is the worst. It is the worst screenplay. It's one of the worst screenplays I've ever read. It's like a bad episode of Magnum PI, which is this old show with. It starts in Marina Del Rey, and these guys are on the back of a boat in Marina Del Rey drinking Mai Tais or something, and the whole movie is a flashback. You know, it has the screenplay has little. It was before they brought in before Coppola brought in what's his name, John Milius. Okay, and John Milius like added in the Heart of Darkness thread. And then brought and John Milius wrote all of the great dialogues. I love the smell of napalm in the morning and the horror and all of that other stuff. This is all John Milius stuff. Like Lucas didn't have anything to do with. Lucas didn't have anything to do with that. And then, so Coppola winds up making the movie. Lucas originally wrote the screenplay. Then it gets rewritten by John Milius and I think a guy named Michael Hare. And then Coppola goes and he makes it. And there's a whole story involved in the making of that film. But, you look at these little nuggets of things like the original screenplay of Apocalypse Now by George Lucas, and you think, this guy he's not really a very good writer. Like, and his award-winning movie that he did before that was THX 1138, and then he made not Fast Times at Ridgemont. He made the Hot Rod movie that took place in Marin. It was
with Harrison Ford in as well, as I think, wasn't it?
With about the high schoolers, right?
High schoolers. Yeah, and the word was that what's his name? Wasserman, Lou Wasserman, who was the boss at Universal, hated that movie so much that he was trying to, a week before it went into theaters, he was trying to sell it to ABC TV as a movie of the week. Like, that's how much he hated the movie. And he didn't like George Lucas. He sold George Lucas's contract to 20th Century Fox. So George Lucas was a Universal player, and his contract got sold to 20th Century Fox. And then the next movie that he made was Star Wars, and Star Wars was in trouble. Go on.
Go on. I was just going to say that I've got a very similar story when it comes down to in my first job in the Hilton in 1999, just after I had seen episode 1, one of my first tips was the first draft of episode 3 from someone who had got the script from Lucas and his people, and he had left it to be photocopied. I photocopied it a load of times, and he said, "Oh, you keep the original." And I read it, and I was finding out about how Darth Vader, I was reading and I was so excited for it, because even though it was a terribly written draft, it was like 24, 25 pages, I think, but it was awful. I mean, it was, I just couldn't make sense of half of it, but you could be like, oh, this is going to be so exciting to see on screen. And then what came out was so far removed from that script, because I think, he's a lot of people like this have a lot of people who work with them to make this stuff a lot better and a lot more acceptable to the audience, because that what I saw was a really, I was really surprised that was the first draft. I wasn't even sure if it was true until
Coppola lost so much control of Zoetrope during the making of Apocalypse Now that the version that got released was not cut by him. It was cut by the producers that film cut it. And I've seen every version of Apocalypse Now that's come out. I believe that the one that was released by the producers is the best one. It is there was a bunch of stuff that he shot. There was scenes in a French plantation and scenes with Playboy bunnies and all of this other stuff that just really didn't add to the story. But anyway, we've gone far and off the field. The point that I was trying to make is just that I think that there is this predictive programming thing going on in media. And this is the long half an hour answer to the question that you were asking about democracy and about why people are fooled into believing that their vote counts. James Corbett refers to ballot boxes now as slave suggestion boxes, which I find to be more appropriate than anything else. And maybe
there is, I mean, what you have to understand. there is a lot of crossover between the fact that what we've had is a manufactured democracy for a long time that's been written by really bad script writers who have written drafts. It's not worked out, and then they've retried it again and again and again and again. And that's, for instance, like I say with the international seminar, and then eventually over years, young global leader. By the looks of it, it's just a template that they keep putting over. It's a bad template, but it's one to control
That's why
society,
you.
and it's one
That's
they
why
use
you
in
have.
media in nearly all the time.
That's why you have to make TV shows like The West Wing, so people think that the government is actually functioning.
Yeah, or House of Cards, so you
Yeah.
can put your man in it. You know,
Exactly. But look what happened to him. He made House of Cards, and then they took him out, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, no one's. You know, these guys are ruthless guys. They're gangsters. If you hang around with gangsters, you expect to be treated like a bait on occasion. And so I don't think he was that surprised at the end of it, because he was one of the things. He associated with the people. He knew what he was doing at the time. And you
Yeah.
know what happens over time if you make loads of bad decisions, really bad decisions, and you've got a bit of a naughty streak, and he's got a real naughty streak. It's going to catch up with you. I've seen it happen to loads of friends all around me. It catches up with you, you know?
Like Joe Pesci in Goodfellas.
Yeah. Oh, I do like Joe Pesci. Yeah, I do. Goodfellas was one of my favorite movies of when I was young, I have to say. I love talking with you about movies. That's really nice. A really nice experience there.
Or we should do it again sometime.
I'd like it.
Yeah.
I'd like it.
So you got anything else for us, Addy?
No, we can. We're pretty much at 2 hours here, so we can plug links. Where can people find your work, Mr. Vedmore? And I hope we can do it again, as Peter mentioned. That would be really fun. But yeah, where can people read your work and support you?
I love being on here. You're great guys. I love chatting away anyway, and I always love speaking with people who've got interest in knowledge that I don't have, because all of this is stuff I'll take in. My work, I'm on Unlimited Hangout, so my most recent article, my Schwab piece for Schwab Family Values, best to go into Unlimited Hangout with Web. Proud to be on that platform. She's doing some good work. .com, where you can find links to the other places I am, but including fungymonkey.com, which is more my media sort of like area, where I also do things like police auditing, where I go up to me and my mate basically pull out our cameras around police stations and stuff, and go up to police and make sure they keep our rights, keep honoring their duty to protect our rights, and we get into little bits of scrapes every now and again. I also go around just talking to people on those. I do all my try and change my investigations into video format as well, so people can read or listen to them. I'm sorry if that's not going at the pace that everybody would want to, and you can find me all around the place. I'm trying to be everywhere at the moment, because there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and I'm really happy to have a certain knowledge. I can't answer every question, but a certain knowledge about how this system is made up and who make up the constituent parts. So I'm really happy for anybody to reach out as well. Extremely approachable. I'm on Twitter quite a lot, and you can have a conversation with me. If you message me, then I will respond.
And in my attempt to, I don't know if I talked about this earlier with you, but I built the Duke Report because there were so many people that were being deplatformed, and the people that I follow seem to be from such a diverse number of platforms that I just tried to pull them all together in one place. The Duke Report was put together basically for me, so that I could go just keep track of people. And so every time you publish something, either on Unlimited Hangout or on johnnyvedmore.com, it will automatically appear on the Duke Report. And so if people are looking for you, they can go to the Duke Report and you'll be there. And there's always going to be a link to your whatever your latest story is on the homepage. If people click on the last 10 stories, they'll get the last 10 Johnny Vedmore stories. And then at the bottom of the page,
Awesome.
there's a Johnny Vedmore link, and it will take you straight to the Johnny Vedmore site. So I'm just trying to make this thing, I have no original content on the Duke Report. It's all links to other sites. It's just a clearinghouse for information. So if you guys,
hey, this is what we need in the whole world. We need people communicating, working together, and cross-platforming in the independent media, and putting aside silly little spats as well and stuff.
exactly. Well, it's the dialectic
To fight a
that's
much bigger agenda.
well, it's like you said about Star Wars. They want us fighting each other instead of over details, instead of looking at what they're doing to the whole world.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So I pimped the Duke Report, and you pimped Johnny Vedmore. What do you have to say, Addy?
Yeah, Twitter at one Addy Ads, a Substack, addyads.substack.com, which is also on the Duke Report. So you can go to the Duke Report for that as well. And Rockfin for video, which we're live streaming to right now. And you can buy me a coffee or a tea, actually, at buymeacoffee.com/addyads. And Peter's also on there as well. So
Indeed. Right. People have been buying me coffee. I had too much coffee. That's why I had to duck out. So anyway, with that, I will say good night, folks. And we'll talk to you later.
Good night.
ciao.